All right, Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. Thank you very much for tuning in today. So much to talk about after a few days off for vacation. Joining us on the phones right now to get a handle on some of what's going on statewide and nationally, our good friend Matt Mackowiak, Republican strategist, joins us here on the phone. Matt, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Chad. Thanks so much for having me, and welcome back.
Thank you very much. Always good to speak with you. Let's start off with a story that I haven't talked about yet, and that is Senator John Cornyn. It looks like he may get a serious. He already had one primary challenger, maybe two, but people who have always run. But he may have a serious primary challenger, Matt, and. This is one that I really don't understand why. Why this person's even taking the time to do this.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. Pat Fallon, who's a state senator from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, is a friend and a great conservative, and I think in some ways the rising star of the party. Kind of does things the right way. He votes very conservative. He holds more town halls than probably any Texas Republican in office. He's just a great guy. I'm with you though. I don't really understand it. There's a difference between the level of, grassroots enthusiasm for someone like Ted Cruz versus someone like John Cornyn. They're just very different senators. Cornyn has played more of an inside game. He's, earned considerable seniority since he's been in the Senate since 2003. He, rose to the position of majority whip, the number 2 position in leadership. He's very senior on judiciary. So he's a very effective senator who's held in well regard. Is he a fire breather? Does he sort of feed the grassroots and on a day-to-day basis the way Cruz does? No. But from a vote standpoint, one of the questions I'd have is, does Pat Fallon have one vote he can point to that he would have voted different than Cornyn? I really asked that question. And so, I just don't understand this. To me, what this would do is divide the party at a time when Texas is under siege from the left. And it, potentially would suck up considerable money, millions of dollars, potentially, if he's able to raise it. And we need to be focused on, the 8 congressional seats that are in play, and the holding Texas House, which is at risk. And so, divisive statewide primary for U.S. Senate really is something that only benefits Democrats at this point. So I hope he's just exploring it, and he may get some positive feedback from the grassroots, but I imagine he's not going to find a pathway to raising money or a pathway to victory. That said, it is a free shot for him in the sense that he is not up for re-election, so he can do this without risking his state Senate seat. So we'll see how it develops. I think it would not be a good thing if it moves forward, and I'll be happy to tell him that if he wants to hear my opinion.
Yeah, and I know Mark Davis in Dallas has weighed in on this and said basically the same thing, and that it just, if you're Fallon, you're having to go against not only an incumbent, a longtime incumbent with Cornyn, but also a guy who has the backing of the president, who has the backing of Senator Cruz, has the backing of Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott. That's a pretty tough headwind to go into.
It is. It kind of makes you wonder, where do you go? And I think it's fair to say that the major donors around the state are not going to be supporting a primary challenge to Cornyn. So if you don't have sort of, that kind of political help from the statewide, and you don't have the donor help that you need to raise several $1 million to be credible, I guess he thinks he can, maybe just do it with grassroots alone. And look, it's a big state. These guys the guys and gals that only represent one district somewhere, I think fundamentally misunderstand how large our state is and how hard it is to run a statewide campaign, particularly if you've never done it before. Just getting your statewide name ID to 20 or 30%, which is insufficient, is a Herculean task that costs $5 or $10 million. Keep in mind, this is a federal race. It's different than what Fallon has done in the past. Maximum contribution level is $2,800. So he would have to do it in $2,800 chunks. At the state level, you can raise unlimited contributions. So I just really don't see a pathway there. He may think Cornyn's vulnerable in a primary, but to me, there are so many hurdles. I don't know why you do it unless he wants to try to build up his name and build up his donor base and all of that for the future. so you can run statewide in the future when the seat becomes available.
Yeah, okay, and you just hit on something I was about to ask you. Could this be a ploy for that? You know, if this is, maybe Cornyn's last go at it, or if dominoes start to fall for other statewide offices like governor or lieutenant governor in the future, does even forming an exploratory committee help raise his name ID for a future run for something else?
Well, it kind of depends what you do with the exploratory. I mean, if he's out there collecting email addresses and raising some money to get started and doing a lot of interviews and raising his profile, then sure, there's value there. I think the question is, when you do something like this, there's good and there's bad that comes with it, right? I mean, he's going to have a microscope now on him, his record, his statements, however he makes a living, his financial disclosures, his contributors, those kinds of things now are going to get looked at in a way they weren't being looked at yesterday. So, yes, in terms of name ID and profile, yes, I mean, it can benefit you. It's also fleeting. I mean, it's very short term. Unless you are in the news on a regular basis consistently over a long period of time, your name ID may go up for a little bit, but it's going to come back down as you go back to just being a state senator representing one of 31 state senate districts in Texas. So, I guess he wants to just look at it. And look, I guess there's no harm in looking at it. But I think he's going to probably find some of his friends are not going to be thrilled with this idea, and that may ultimately push him not to do this. We'll see.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Matt, I'll ask you about one of the other, probably the most surprising story as we got back into Lubbock when I finally started paying attention to political news. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and the NRA not seeing eye to eye on background checks. And today, I think it's today, no, it was yesterday, the Austin American-Statesman editorial board praising the lieutenant governor and saying the rest of the Republican Party should fall in line behind him. Matt, what's going on here? What's the lieutenant governor doing? Is this a right political move? Is do you think he's looking at polling? What is this all about?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and it's gotten a good amount of attention the last few days since this came out. I think he feels, and I think the governor also feels, that they have to do something meaningful after both El Paso and Odessa. And of course, in the Odessa situation, we had an individual who failed a background check in 2014 on mental health grounds, who apparently was able to go out and purchase a gun through a private sale from one stranger to another. And so I think my guess is the governor's on board with the lieutenant governor. I imagine they're aligned because they're both are taking some political risk here in doing this. I think they want to be able to say that they, did something that prevented another Odessa situation from occurring. Obviously, there's going to be some resistance here. The NRA is not on board, and the NRA is not the group that has the power. It's their members that have the power, and they have a large number of members, especially in Texas. Texas has the most NRA members of any state. So it's a question now of can they sell it, and can they convince lawful gun owners that, number one, this won't be a significant burden, and number two, that it's necessary. My understanding is that this is it's not going to create a national gun registry or a statewide gun registry. It's not going to create a lot of a burden for people who want to go through a private sale. They're just going to be able to go to a gun store and be able to conduct the background check there and do the transfer there. So we'll see whether that's ultimately something that can pass the Senate and pass the House. I imagine it probably can pass the House. Whether it can pass the Senate, I think, is an open question. I mean, would Patrick put it on the floor and have it pass the Senate if it passed with, let's say, 2/3 or even all of the Democrats and just a handful of Republicans? I think that's an open question. So, yeah, it must be an out-of-body experience for the Lieutenant Governor to wake up and have a praising editorial from the Austin American-Statesman. And I imagine he's gotten certainly some negative feedback in the last few days, but he seems pretty convinced that this is the right thing to do, and he's obviously a very powerful figure in state politics. But to me, the question is, can they sell this, right? I think from a policy standpoint, there are some good reasons to really look at this. Should we allow two strangers to be able to transfer a gun, particularly when it's someone who failed a background check, right? If this person hadn't failed a background check, that might be a different situation. But the fact that he did, it would seem to me, what's the point of a background check if you can just go around the system and purchase a gun from someone else and do it in a lawful way? So, again, I mean, we don't want to infringe on the rights of lawful gun owners. We're a strong Second Amendment state, and I am as well. I think the lieutenant governor feels like that this is really important to do, and we'll see whether he, number one, sticks by this, but number two, whether he's able to sell it.
Well, and here's what I think it also comes down to, Matt, is that right now we're talking about this. The legislature doesn't meet for a couple of years. And you know what's going to be on the table then is redistricting. That's going to be the big thing. So is this enough to call a special session, in your opinion, to tackle the issue, or do you think they wait 2 years to tackle the issue?
Yeah, so the reason it's hard to answer that question is I think it depends on a number of things. First of all, it depends on the feedback they get to this idea. Second, it's going to depend on how the House and Senate Select Committees, which were just set up on preventing mass shootings, how those committees move forward. I mean, I think if there was significant bipartisan support for this idea or for some other ideas, that would increase the pressure, but that would also probably increase the confidence the governor has that something meaningful would happen. I mean, just calling a special session without a consensus is not a way to succeed.
Right.
It may make people feel good. It may give Democrats a chance to hammer these issues, but it doesn't really lead anywhere meaningful. And I think that's the point the governor's making right now is that there's no consensus. There's no clear pathway to passing something that would make a difference. And so that's what has to change. But look, I think the governor's inclination on this is to not do a special session. He doesn't like special sessions. He doesn't think they're necessary. That calculation could change if a consensus develops, but we're still a ways away from that. And I also think that next year is a really tough time to do a special session. You've got primaries, you'll have primary runoffs, you have a general election. There's really no good time to do it unless it was, I don't know, maybe June right after the primary runoffs. But, you know, then you're in general election territory, and a lot of people are not going to want to be coming to Austin and spending 30 days here legislating at a time when they're 3 or 4 months from the general election. Yeah,
it might be easy for the governor and for the lieutenant governor to say this when they don't have to run for anything. It's a lot harder for House members who are running for something, especially in a primary. Matt, tell folks what your latest podcast topic is on, and also how they can sign up for your newsletter.
Yeah, thanks. The newsletter is called Must Read Texas. We take all the top news from around the state, put it in one clean, easy-to-read email, and send it out every weekday morning before 9 a.m. You can sign up for a free 1-week trial at mustreadtexas.com. The podcast is called Mac on Politics. It's in the iTunes Store, on Google Play, on Stitcher, and on Spotify. Most recent episode is with Sean Parnell, retired U.S. Army captain, decorated military veteran, who has wrote a fantastic memoir about his 2+ years in Afghanistan called Outlaw Platoon. He has a new book. It's a thriller, a military thriller, out called All Out War. We talked to him about the military, about his experiences, about veterans. It's just a great conversation, so check that out.
All right, Matt, as always, appreciate your time. We'll visit with you next week.
Sounds good, Chad. Take care.
Have a good one. That's Matt Mackowiak, Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.